Waves Communications and Investments Limited, owners of Quest 93.1 FM and Quest Television, takes no responsibility for the opinions or statements on our shows. Topics discussed are not necessarily our station's beliefs and opinions between talk show hosts and guests may differ. This medium takes no responsibility for the opinions of others and the postings of comments in chat rooms or forum posts. Neither do we endorse nor are responsible for the accuracy or reliability of any opinion, advice, information, or statement made in any of our platforms.
Mustafa Ahmed, Director General of the National Emergency Management Agency, says Nigeria will experience severe flooding in 2023 as predicted from responsible agencies. Ahmed spoke at an expert technical training on climate disaster preparedness held in Abuja. He said the seasonal climate predictions and annual flood outlook released by the Nigerian Meteorological Agency and the Nigerian Hydrological Service Agency should be acted upon. He said the flood disaster in 2022 was a wake-up call for emergency response, hoping that many states should do something now on account of it, but also hoping that it is not even too late already. The 2022 flood disaster, which was unprecedented in the history of the nation, wreaked havoc in all states of the country, with many of the affected communities still yet to recover from the impact of the devastating event. Also, Clement Eze, Director General of NIHSA, said that 178 local governments in 32 states and the Federal Capital Territory have been predicted to experience severe flooding in 2023, pleading with different state governments to act now before it is too late. But the big question on the big story for today is, with over 569,000 hectares of farmland destroyed, over 600 deaths recorded, and over 1.4 million persons in 34 of the 36 states of the Federation displaced in the 2022 flood, how prepared is the federal government and state government in averting a reoccurrence in 2023? With the peak period expected between the end of July and end of September, it is not even too late for anything to be put in place now. Well, these and more as it concerns the looming disaster is what this edition of The Big Story is all about. And we're talking about the 2023 flood prediction, averting the looming disaster. And that's what we're having as a major discourse today on The Big Story. We're talking about the 2023 flood prediction and what needs to be done to avert this looming disaster. And that's what we're having as a major discourse today on The Big Story. And indeed, you agree with me that is quite timely, judging by the recent turn of events, especially in some communities in Delta State and also in the Niger Delta, experiencing some flashes of flood already. And what has to be or needs to be done is what we're also discussing today on The Big Story. But to help us talk about this, I'll be joined by two guests, but we have one already in the studio, and one is coming all the way from Bayelsa, knowing how really important this discussion is, to join us, and he will join us shortly. But right here in the studio is a member of the Nigerian Environmental Society, Delta State Chapter, and I'm talking of no other person but Mr. Victor Asunji. Good morning and welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Mike. Good to see you again.
Well, it's good to also see you, but well, not a good news we're already getting, especially from Nimet. But anyway, the National Emergency Management Agency has warned that Bayelsa, Lagos, Rivers, and our own state Delta really stand a risk of flooding in 2023 than any other states of the Federation. And even started these, and funny enough, they even started or stated this warning as early as February this year. And the prediction is hinged on large volume of rainfall and the resultant coastal flooding due to expected rise in sea level and tidal surge. But my question is, are we already experiencing such, and how really serious is flooding going to be this year as predicted by NIMET?
Thank you very much. If you remember the last time I was here, I told you we always have flooding, yes, whether NIMET predicts or not. And it's I think a couple of weeks back that I told you that, and we're beginning to see the outcome of those, that prediction. That prediction actually predates February. It was made in November last year, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so the issues that lead to flooding are living with us. And one of the biggest illusions of the common man is that we are immune to these things. We are not immune to them. We are exposed to the consequences of flooding as much as it can be obtained anywhere in the world. Delta State is a peculiar one. We're a coastal state. Although we do not have the largest, longest coastline, but be that as it may, we're a coastal state, so we're exposed to flooding from both sides, both the coastal flood, both two types of flooding actually. Yeah. Even three, if you ask me, Delta State is exposed to the three of them. The flash flood, the river flood, and the possible storm surge, which is most devastating.
So, but are we already seeing such evidence of it right here in Delta State? Because I know prior to this, our discussion, yes, we made promise of going around some communities to see if we've already started experiencing them. Have they started? Are the signs already there?
Yes, the signs are there. If you look at the volume of rainfall we've experienced in a couple of days or weeks back, they have been enormous. And if you look at our drains, I think the state or local government has commenced its usual knee-jerk approach of clearing drains. Whenever you see them clear drains or see them clear water hyacinths, you know what to expect. But I think we should have more sustainable and sustained measures towards curbing flooding. I was to go to one of the riverine communities yesterday, but much as I do not have any reason not to, but I think the rise in water level was one of my reasons for staying back.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, now the most comprehensive impact of the 2022 flood disaster analyzed yet was that from NEMA in June in Uyo during the flag up of the downscaling of disaster early warning measures to the grassroots, where it was revealed that more than 4 million Nigerians were affected and caused the death of almost 665 Nigerians, displaced over 2 million persons, destroyed about 355,966 houses, and 944,989 hectares of farmland. But my question is, with all of these looming disasters, how that affected us last year, have we been able to not only come out of the disaster itself? Have the communities you visited, have they been able to restart their lives that we are now having a looming disaster just over their neck?
Coming out of the disaster in Nigeria?
So they've not been able to get their lives back?
They can't even. Nigeria can't even immediately. We're talking about over 4.6 trillion naira lost by just NEMA's estimation in 2022 flood. Yeah. Coming out of that disaster is going to take a whole lot of processes. If you look at our roads, our infrastructure travel from here to Asaba, you still see that the roads are largely still suffering from the effects of the flood. Towards east-west route is the same thing. So coming out of disaster is a very high wish. I will also tell you that the government has not been able to find a way around these usual events. Yeah. Flooding is not an emergency, if you ask me, in all honesty. Flooding is a certainty. You should be able to prepare for it. We've had, okay, what usually is the concern is the volume.
Okay.
But it must happen.
So it's not something.
It's not something. Yes,
wish
you know, it's not something we can wish away under the present circumstances. It's not what you can just predict or say, okay, we are hoping to have. No, we always have flooding. What will be the argument is the scale, the volume of flooding we are going to have. Like the 2022 flooding is being compared to that of 2020.
We'll have a breakdown of that, especially for our viewers who are watching, because we want to really compare that of 2022 to that of 2012 and actually see if it's all the same. And that's where we tend to stand. And let's look at it. Yes, in case you are there on our TV, and I'll just have to give a breakdown of it on the radio arm, so at least those that are also not watching will also have a full understanding of it. And let's see how we can really do that now. Okay, now let's go to it. For those that are really not watching, but those are listening to us on the TV. Now let's compare. Now let's talk about duration. Now in 2012, we had the flood. The period it really lasted was from July to October. If you take your mind now to that of 2022, it was for 5 months. We had that of May and also October. Now let's take our mind again to the locations. In 2012, it affected 30 states, and in 2022, it affected 33 states. Sad it is. And let's continue on that range. And also the causes in 2012 was rainfall, the Lado Dam, and the climate change. And also the causes in 2022 was also similar. Rainfall, the dam, and the climate change. But okay, let's come to casualties, because that's even where I'm far more concerned to see how the impact was in 2012. In 2012, we had 363 deaths, 2.1 million displaced IDP persons, 7.7 million affected. And also in 2022, we had about 614 deaths, quite doubles that of the death we recorded in 2012. And we had 1.4 million persons, more than those displaced that were in the IDP camps, but a bit lower with 2.5 million persons affected, and maybe because of those that were seen to be around the coastlines. But anyway, let's also look at it. The impact rating worst in 40 years in 2012, and impact rating worst in 10 years, worst among 19 African countries. 10 indicates that it was in 2012. So we just had to count all about that. So, well, economic loss in 2012, it was just 2.6 trillion naira. But in 2022, we had 4.2 trillion naira lost on account of flood. Well, quite devastating, you say. But anyway, that's how really scary it is. And with NIMET warning and prediction, it might almost likely be more this year. But talking about more, well, we now have our guest joining us. We're talking of no other person, also an environmentalist, and we're talking of no other person but Berafa Bedford. He joined us all the way from Bayelsa, and I know how really the roads are, but thank you so much for also joining us. And I know how really important our discussion centered on the impact of the impending flood is. But let me quickly bring you into the discussion. Yes, like I said, the NEMA DG, Ahmed, noted that in 2023, flood could be similar or worse than what it occurred in 2022. And one of the reasons he did give was basically lack of preparation. That is what he feel will be also a reason for us having more devastating impact. But I do know that you planned visiting some affected areas in Bayelsa State last week before we told you we'll be having this. And to just notice how really impactful the impending flood is. So my question now is, I really want to understand two questions. I know you visited some communities. Have they started experiencing it? And how really serious would this year flood be when you compare it to 2022?
Thank you very much. Nice to be on this program again.
Yes.
You know, visiting some communities in Bayelsa State, particularly our coastal communities.
Yes.
You know, we have special communities. I call them special impact communities,
okay,
where year in, year out, they are always impacted by the flood. Visiting those communities, you will see that it has been, they're psychologically prepared already, waiting for the flood, because of course government involvement is little or nothing. Government always say the flood will be coming, flood will be coming, flood will be coming, but there's nothing on ground. There's little or no impact. Well, what we noticed in Bayelsa that some of the particularly in the city, some of the waterways, drainages are being cleared, water hyacinths being removed, and those are the regular practices. But in terms of preparation, in terms of looking at the adverse effect on the indigenes, so let's prepare against and see what we can do to mitigate the effect of the flood. There's really nothing to hold on to. But the visibility of the flood already, the increase in rainfall already is sending already signals in some communities. And
are we already experiencing flooding in this community?
In some of those communities, you could see the water starting to rise. But in terms of adverse effects of the flooding, we've not necessarily seen, but rainfalls also has displaced a whole lot of persons in their abode.
Can you give us the name of these communities you visited and likely occurrence of them?
Okay, I visited the OD, which is one of those impact areas, but for now, the flood has not seemed to, you could see the water rising gradually, but there's no adverse effects yet. I also visit Buguru community where those flooding also take place. You could see the water rising, but already, because there's no proper drainage system, rainfall, also you could see some, stagnant waters here and there, and people already psychologically prepared, to face those effects.
Okay, now let's come to preparation. Is it that no lessons were learned both from the federal government and state government on account of late preparation, on account of the flood we had in 2022? Because the United Nations, in their report early this year, blamed Nigeria and some other governments that experienced flood on account of late preparation. So let's understand this, because you said, you've not seen any major preparation on the part of state government or federal government. So is it that we've not learned from the lessons of last year?
For me, in Nigeria, there's this usual scenario, like the security, they'll tell you security challenge, and you see some level of fat budgetary allocation. And for me, the flood budget, I call it the flood economy, because when there's flood, of course, there is budgetary allocation, and you could see some persons, NEMA, in the office of NEMA and NIPES and some strategic offices, you could see that they are celebrating, and because they'll go with fat pockets. So necessarily there's no lesson learned as such, apart from the usual, clearing of water hyacinths, and doing some basic things that they usually do. There's nothing special they've done in preparation, year in, year out. It is safe to say that the speculation about this 2023 flood, it was not yesterday. It was not yesterday. Since January, there has been speculation that there will be flooding, but there is no significant, impact. However, the Bayelsa State government did inaugurated some committee to look into, to prepare and look into, analyze.
But is it all about just creating committees and not seeing?
But you know that in Nigeria we are very good at creating committees, but implementation has been our woes so far over the years. Has been our woes. Implementing what the strategic plan, as the case may be, has been our challenge for Nigeria. For us as Nigerians, we are already prepared to face the worst case scenario, because there's no preparation. The Nigerian government are not necessarily caring about the indigenes, the well-being of the indigenes. After, you see, by December we now see some statistics, 30 million of persons displaced, and because that has been the recurrent situation. So for me, it has to boil down to community effort. It has to boil down to individual effort, because if we wait for the government, my brother, it is well.
Okay, anyway, we'll wait no more on that, but I'll plead with both of you to wait. We need to go on a break now. And when we come back, we'll continue our discussion as we talk about that prediction coming from NIMET, saying that the 2023 flood might even be a bit worse than what we experienced in 2022. But what have both the state and federal government done in averting more disaster coming to Nigerians on account of the flood? Let's go on a break.